The sight of Kemi walking through the bustling streets of Lagos, a beautiful figure hidden under loose clothing, an unmistakable bulge beneath her jeans was enough to turn heads. It wasn't her beauty that caught people's attention anymore. It was the fact that she wore adult diapers, pampers at 27 years old of age. Kemi had always been the pride of her family, with her dark, flawless skin and an elegance that drew admiration from men and women. She had always stood out. Growing up in a poor household in Ibadan, she had managed to get a decent education and a good job in Lagos, despite the challenges. She was determined to make something out of herself. But everything changed the day her mother fell gravely ill. It started with a simple fatigue. Kemi's mother, Iyabo, had been a strong woman despite her years of hard labor. When she began to weaken, it didn't take long before the doctors diagnosed her with a severe kidney condition. The medical bills mounted quickly, and the situation grew more dire by the day. Kemi, with no siblings to share the burden, found herself drowning in debt. She loved her mother more than anything and could not bear the thought of losing her.
The money was running out. The hospital needed a down payment for surgery, and the little salary Kemi earned from her administrative job couldn't cover even a fraction of it. She reached out to friends, pleaded with distant relatives, but no one had enough to help. Then she met Adewale. Adewale was a well-known politician, a man of great influence in Lagos. His face was plastered on billboards, his name on the lips of many who admired or feared him. He was notorious for his wealth and the company of beautiful women that often followed him. Kemi had never been the type to mix with men like him. She valued her dignity, and despite being approached many times by wealthy suitors, she had always said no. But this time, things are different. Adewale had noticed Kemi at a friend's party. He was immediately captivated by her beauty, the way her long hair pulled down her shoulders, the grace with which she carried herself. He approached her with smooth words and a knowing smile, but Kemi wasn't interested in his flattery. She wanted to leave, but as soon as she learned about her situation and mother illness, the crushing financial burden, his tone changed. "I can help you," he said casually, sipping from his glass of champagne. "I have the money you need, Kemi, but nothing come for free in this life." The offer hung in the air between them. It was clear what he wanted in return. Kemi heart raised as she weighed her option. She knew exactly what a man like Adewale was. Someone who uses power to get whatsoever he wants. But her mother was dying, and the thought of her in pain, of her not getting the treatment she desperately needed, was more than Kemi could bear. As days passed, Kemi made a choice she never thought she would. One night, just one night with Adewale, and the money will be ours. The hotel room was luxurious, draped in gold and silk. Kemi stood by the window staring out into the city lights, her heart pounding in her chest. Adewale was in the room watching her, waiting. She could feel his gaze burning into her back. "This won't take long," he said. Kemi's stomach turned as she forced to move. She had to do this for her mother. What happened that night was something she tried to bury deep in her memory. But no matter how hard she tried, it always resurfaced. The weight of his body, the way she had felt trapped, the emptiness in his eyes as he took what he paid for. When it was over, he handed her a large envelope filled with cash. just as he had promised. I hope your mother gets well, he said, barely looking at her as he walked out of the door. Kemi took the money, her hand shaking, and left. A few weeks passed. Kemi used the money to pay for her mother's surgery. Her mother's condition improved, and Kemi tried to return to her normal life. But something was wrong. She began to experience sharp, unbearable pain in her lower abdomen. At first, she thought it was stress or maybe a side effect of everything she had been through, but the pain got worse. One morning, while at work, Kemi realized that she couldn't control her bladder. Embarrassed and confused, she rushed to the bedroom, only to find out she had wet herself without even feeling the urge. Mortified, she cleaned herself up, but the problem persisted. Soon, it became a regular occurrence. After several humiliating incidents, Kemi went to see a doctor and all the tests came out negative, meaning what nothing was wrong with her medically. The condition left Kemi with no control over her bladder. She was forced to wear adult diapers, pampers just to function in her day-to-day life. She had to quit her job because of the shame and embarrassment were too much to bear. Every day, she felt the judgmental stares of people who had noticed the bunk beneath her clothes, who whispered behind her back. The worst part was that Adewale had disappeared. He had given her the money, and that was the end of their transaction. She couldn't comfort him or seek any form of justice. Her life had become a prison. The beautiful, confident woman who had held her head high now moved through the world with their eyes downcast, hiding her secret shame. One day, as Kemi sat with her mother trying to enjoy a quiet afternoon in their small living room, her mother Iyabo was doing much better after the surgery. Her health was slowly returning. For a moment, it felt like things were normal, but Kemi knew better. Nothing had been normal since that night with Adewale. As they spoke, Kemi shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She could feel her diapers starting to get filled. The familiar panic began to rise in her chest. She needed to change and quickly. Mama, let me go out and buy something, Kemi said, rising to her feet, trying to keep her voice calm. She knew there was no more time. She was out of pampers, and if she didn't move fast, she would lose control in front of her mother. Why are you always rushing out these days, Kemi? Sit down, let's talk for a little longer, Iyabo said, her voice filled with concern. But Kemi couldn't sit. The pressure was unbearable now. She nodded hastily and rushed towards the door, praying she could make it to the pharmacy down the street in time. As she took a few hurried steps, it happened. Without warning, a rush of warm liquid streamed down her leg, soaking her clothes and forming a small puddle on the floor. The sound of the water hitting the tiles was unmistakable. Kemi froze, her heart pounding in her ears. Her mother's eyes widened as she watched the scene unfold before her. Time seemed to slow down. The room was thick with silence. Kemi, what is happening? Her mother's voice broke the quiet trembling with confusion and fear. Kemi couldn't speak. Her body was paralyzed with shame. Her face flushed and her hand trembled as she stood there, soaked and defeated. The truth she had hidden for so long was out in the open, laid bare for her mother to see. Kemi, talk to me, Iyabo pleaded, struggling to stand up from her chair. Her eyes filled with worry as she moved closer. Why didn't you tell me something? What is happening to you, Kemi? Tears welled up in Kemi's eyes as she tried to find the words. How could she explain this? How could she tell her mother about the one night stand that had stolen everything from her? the night she has sacrificed herself to save her. Mama, I am sorry, Kemi whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't want you to worry. I had to do something for you. Her mother face softened with confusion. What do you mean, my child? Kemi couldn't hold it any longer. She sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face, the weight of the secret finally crushing her. That night, I did something to get the money for your surgery. I didn't have any other choice nor option. Her mother knelt beside her, holding her trembling hands. What are you saying, Kemi? What is it? What did you do? Kemi stopped. As the words spilled out, she told her mother everything about Adewale, the deal she had made, and the medical condition that has plagued her ever since. When she finished, her mother sat intoned silence, her face a mix of shock and sorrow. Tears filled Iyabo's eyes as she realized the terrible price her daughter had paid to save her life. Kemi, her mother whispered, her voice cracking. Why? Why didn't you tell me this? Why do you have to go through this alone? I don't want you to feel guilty, Mama, Kemi said through her tears. I couldn't watch you suffer. I did this because I loved you. Kemi wrapped her hands around her daughter, pulling her close. Oh, my child, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. They cried together, the pain and the regret of the past washing over them both. Kemi had endured so much, and her mother had ache for the sacrifice her daughter had made. From that day on, Iyabo becomes Kemi's greatest support. She helped her daughter through her condition, no longer allowing her to suffer in silence. They begin to search for medical treatment, hoping for a solution to heal Kemi's body. Kemi mother, Iyabo, sat quietly beside her daughter in the hospital. The doctors had done everything they could, but Kemi's condition was getting worse. The uncontrollable flow of urine has reached a point where no medicine nor treatment seemed to help. It was as if her body was beyond repair. One afternoon, after weeks of consultation and tests, a traditional healer was brought in by Iyabo. Desperate for answers, Kemi had lost all hope in modern medicine. The healer, an elderly woman named Iyabeji, observed Kemi closely. After a few minutes of silence, she nodded slowly. This is not a medical issue, Iyabeji said, her voice grave. This is something far more darker. Iyabo had skipped a bit. What do you mean, Iyabeji? Iyabeji looked at Kemi, her gaze filled with sorrow. Your daughter has been used for a ritual. The man she was with that night didn't just take her body, he took something much deeper. Kemi's stomach dropped. The memory of that night with Adewale, the wealthy politician, came flooding back. She had pushed it to the back of her mind, trying to forget the shame, the regret, but now it all makes sense. What kind of ritual? Iyabo asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The urine flowing from her body, Iyabeji explained, is not just a symptom, it's part of the curse. With every drop, her energy, her life force is drained and converted into wealth for the man who cursed her. The more she suffered, the more powerful and wealthy he becomes. Kemi heart raced at the realization hit her like a wave. Adewale had not just used her for pleasure, he had used her for his own dark gain. The ritual was the source of his growing wealth, his unstoppable success. Every time she suffered, he prospered. Iyabo's hand shook as she processed the healer words. What can we do? How can we stop this? Here Abeji shook her head sadly. Rituals like this are powerful. They tie the victim's spirit to the one who had cast the cross. The only way to break the curse is to comfort the man and force him to undo what he has done. Chemis felt a storm of anger rising within her. She had suffered in silence for too long, humiliated, broken, and trapped in a living nightmare, all for Adewale greed. Now it was clear that she had been nothing more than a tool for his wealth. Kenny and her mother Iyabo arrived at Adewale's mansion. The weight of what they are about to do pressed heavily on their shoulders. Kemi had suffered long enough, her body drained, her spirit crushed by the endless flow of urine that only grew worse by the day. And now they knew why. Adewale, the powerful politician who had lured Kemi into a deal for her mother's medical bills, had used her in a dark ritual to increase his wealth. Every drop of her suffering fueled his growing empire. They are going to comfort him. They would demand justice, but nothing could have prepared Iyabo for what is going to happen next. As the security guard initially refused to open the gate for Iyabo and her daughter, Iyabo shouted at the gate, her voice filled with anger and desperation. "We need to see him. Where is that riffraff?" she screamed. Moments later, Adewale appeared at the entrance of his lavish mansion, dressed in an expensive suit, his presence commanding. He walked towards them, his cold, arrogant demeanor unchanged. But as he grew closer, something in his face made Iyabo freeze in a track. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Iyabo's breath caught in her throat, the eyes staring back at her face. The face she saw was so clearly, even now, it was not unfamiliar. It was one she had known for many years ago. Adewale, she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. The name came out like a gasp, and Kemi looked at her mother confused. Adewale's confident expression fluttered for a second, as if he recognized Iyabo too, but quickly marked it with his usual snarl. "What is this?" Adewale demanded. But Iyabo's leg felt weak as memories from years ago flooded in her mind. She hadn't seen Adewale since their university days. Decade ago, he was the same Adewale who had vanished after she had fallen pregnant, the same man who had left her alone to raise their child, their only daughter, Kemi. "You?" Iyabo whispered, taking a step forward. "You? Kemi father?" Adewale's expression froze completely. But Iyabo's words had already pressed through his heart like a knife. Kemi turned to her mother, her heart pounding in her chest. "What, Mama? What are you talking about?" Iyabo's voice shook as she spoke, her gaze never leaving Adewale. "Kemi, he is the man who abandoned me when I was pregnant with you. He is your father." A silence fell over them. Kemi at raced, trying to process the horrifying truth. Adewale, the man who had crossed her, the man who had slept with her, the man who had drained life out of her for his own greed, was the father she never known, a man who had walked away from her mother without a word all these years. Adewale remained silent, his face pale. Adewale's world began to spin. He had not expected this. Kemi, his daughter, the girl who he had lured into his dark web of wealth and power, the same girl whose life force he had drained for his own prosperity, was his own flesh and blood. "No," he whispered, but the word barely escaped his lips. His body was rigid, the weight of the revelation crushing him. Kemi stood frozen behind her mother, the truth sinking in like a stone in her chest. The man who had sought help, who she had sought help from, the man who had ruined her life, was the father she never knew. Her, the man who was supposed to protect her, has instead condemned her to unimaginable suffering. You are my father. Adewale mind raced, flashes of his past sin bombarding him all at once. He had abandoned Iyabo all these years ago, left her to raise their child alone. He had moved on, building a life of wealth and power, fueled by his rituals that demanded blood and sacrifice. He had married and had countless affairs with side chicks, but despite all his efforts, none of them had ever given him a child. A sickening realization hit him like a punch to the gut. His devilish part has been the reason. The rituals he had performed for wealth and power had demanded that he remain childless. All these years, he had believed himself to be cursed with infertility. It was the price he had to pay for his greed, for the darkness that had consumed him. And now, the only child that he had fathered, the one who he had never known existed, was the one he had crossed in his web of rituals. No, no, he muttered, his voice hollow, his vision broad, as the full magnitude of his actions consumed him. Kemi's anger flared. You cursed me. You ruined my life. And now you are telling me you are my father? Her voice shook with rage and disbelief. How could you do this to your own child? Adewale's mouth moved, but no words came out. The memories of every cruel heart, every ritual, and every moment of greed flashed before his eyes. The woman he had used, the life he has destroyed, all for the money and power. His mind echoed with the sound of their suffering, and now his daughter's face was at the center of it all. I didn't know, he choked out. His voice trembled, devoid of the arrogance he had always carried. He had never imagined this. He had cursed his own blood, and the thought of it twisted his stomach. Ayabo stepped forward, her eyes blazing with fury. You left me, Adewale. You left me to raise her alone. And now, after all these years, you came back into her life only to destroy it. You a monster. Adewale sank to his knees, his hand shaking. The power, the wealth, none of it meant anything to him anymore. The truth was unbearable. His only child had been crossed by his own hand. His greed has come in its full cycle. I I don't know, Adewale repeated, his voice breaking. I didn't know she was my daughter. If only if I had known. Kemi eyes burned with tears, but her anger was far greater than her sorrow. It doesn't matter now, does it? You used me. You destroyed my life for your wealth, for your power. You left my mother and never looked back. And now you want pity? Adewale looked at his daughter, the weight of his sin crushing him. He had always been untouchable, or so he thought, but now he had lost the only thing that mattered, the only thing that he had always believed he couldn't have, a child. I was blinded by greed, he muttered, unable to look at them in the eyes. I've done terrible things, but I don't know, Kemi, I don't know you were my daughter, but it doesn't change the fact of what you did, Kemi shouted, her voice filled with pain and betrayal of a lifetime. You cursed me for your own gain, and now I have to live with the consequences. You stole everything away from me. Adewale head hung, unable to face the truth of his actions, his wealth, his empire. It had all been built on the suffering of others, and now it had come back to haunt him in the worst way possible. Yabeji, the traditional healer, stepped forward, her eyes filled with wisdom. Adewale, your path with the darkness has come full cycle. Your wealth and power have come at a cost. Now you must face the price of your greed. Adewale heart pounded in his chest, a cold sweat breaking out over his skin. Is there any way I can undo this? Iyabeji looked at him with pity. There is no undoing what you've done, but you can break the curse on your daughter. It will cost you everything you've gained, your wealth, your power, your empire, the rituals you gave. All must be undone. Adewale head snapped up in fear, flashing in his eyes. I will lose everything? Yes, Yabo. Iya Abeji said firmly. But you will save your daughter. Adewale heart raced. Could he give up everything he had worked for? Everything he had sacrificed for? But as he looked at Kemi, the daughter he had knowingly caused, the pains in his eyes broke him for the first time in years. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: remorse. Slowly, Adewale nodded. I will do it. I will undo the curse. As Iyabeji began her chant, and as she did, Adewale felt the pull of his wealth and power slipping away. His body grew weaker, his energy draining as the dark forces that had fueled his life were reversed. The mansion around them seemed to shrink. Kemi watched in silence, her heart heavy with a mist of emotion. As Adewale wealth dissolved, so did the curse on her. She felt a sudden lightness in her body. The pain that has plagued her for months began to lift. When Iyabeji finished, Adewale collapsed on the floor. A broken man, his fortune, his empire, everything he has gained through his evil deed was gone. But Kemi was free.